Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Broke Rednecks Prepping. I'm Matt, coming to you once again from the Bugout location in Spur, Texas. Tiny home capital of the world, and a nice little place to live. What this video is going to be about is Bugout locations. This is filmed on April 16th, 2020, and we're in the middle, as you're probably aware, of the coronavirus pandemic, the cerveza bug. Anyway, the reason I want to talk about Bugout location is if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's the necessity of having a place to escape to. Now, in this video, I'm basically going to cover a Bugout location from 3 points of view. One, very briefly, we're going to talk about why you should get one. And I'll preface this now, for those of you watching, I'm kind of assuming that there's a lot of new preppers out there that are just starting to realize the necessity of being prepared and having things together, having backup plans, having supplies. And so, for those of you who are old hands at this and have a little more experience in the prepper world, forgive me if I go into detail and hit some of the simple things that we take for granted. But we're going to talk about the reasons for getting a Bugout location. We're going to talk about what to look for in a Bugout location. And then we're going to talk a little bit on how to get one, especially if you're on a budget, because right now, let's face it, the economy is going to crap. Everybody's on a budget. First things first, what is a Bugout location? Bugout location is a backup place to go. It does not have to be a cabin on the side of the mountains in the middle of the woods where you can go live like Paul Bunyan or something. It can be a house in a small town. It can be a hunting lease. It can be really anything you want it to be, but it needs to be something where you have the ability to leave where you are and go somewhere safer. Now, for those of y'all who are new to prepping, you're probably hearing the term Bugout location, Bugout bag, Bugout everything. We call it a Bugout because, well, we just do. But no matter where you live in the U.S., right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. And you don't necessarily, if you're, I don't know, in a big city like New York or an area of New Jersey that's got a lot of cases of coronavirus, if you've been exposed, you don't necessarily want to take it somewhere else. But if you're in a city like Oklahoma City or Detroit or New Orleans, where you can tell it's starting to spread and you don't think it's going to be handled well, might be a good idea, especially if you're working from home or if you're laid off, to have a backup place to go to that's going to be a little safer. So that's why pandemic is the first reason on my list. The second one is natural disasters. I was reading the other day that over 60%, two-thirds of the American population live next to the coasts. If you're on the Atlantic coast, you're dealing with hurricanes. If you're on the Pacific coast, you've still got storms and other things that hit it periodically. No matter where you are in the country, Kansas, Oklahoma, places like that get tornadoes. You know, when I lived near Houston, we had 3,500-year floods in consecutive years. We lived through Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Ike, a tropical storm. The interesting thing about the floods is they weren't necessarily, we didn't know they were coming. They weren't predicted. We were told we're going to get a few inches of rain, and then it just never stopped. Everything was underwater. We lived through a microburst, which for those of y'all who don't know, because to be fair, I didn't before I lived through one, it's basically when a thunderstorm dies and explodes all of its energy downwards, like a reverse mushroom cloud. Some of them are fairly light. Some of them take chunks of your metal roof and stick them into the wall of your neighbor's house, as was the case with us. You've also got situations with social unrest. Now, a lot of people think that social unrest is just a prepper thing, that it's never going to happen, but tell that to people who were living in Ferguson in 2015 or some places like that. It does happen. Things boil up. Sometimes they can be predicted. Sometimes they can't. But sometimes you just need somewhere else to be and somewhere else to go. If you know a hurricane's coming, people evacuate cities quite often. Florida. If it's going to hit Miami, they're running up to Orlando or Pensacola or Jacksonville or somewhere. Well, having lived through that and had to evacuate sometimes, and sometimes not having a place to evacuate, we've found that, well, sometimes you just have to go somewhere else. And especially right now where this pandemic is going to lead to some economic upheaval, it could very well lead to some social unrest. I mean, we're already seeing news articles on places like CNN about meat shortages and possible other food shortages. We're not letting in enough farm workers to really help pick crops. That's going to be a problem. Farmers are having to get rid of food because they can't properly harvest and sell it. I'm not saying we're all going to starve. The stores are going to go empty. Don't misunderstand me. But the thing is, there are going to be some shortages, and it's amazing how much those shortages affect people's daily lives. Try buying hand sanitizer at your local Walmart or toilet paper as an example. So my point is sometimes you want a bug out location as a place to go. Another reason, and this is for some of you preppers who tend to want to bug in, as they say, fortify your home and stay safe there. I get it. But as George Patton said, fixed fortifications are a monument to the stupidity of man. No matter how well you secured something, if people want in, they're going to get in. And from a very young age, we've all heard, don't keep all your eggs in one basket. Well, for the purposes of this conversation, why not have a backup location so you can split your preps? Have some of your food, some of your guns, some of your whatever else stored at a location that nobody knows about. Because if you're a prepper, your friends or some of them are going to figure out. And you're going to tell that one guy that isn't going to tell anybody, and 36 people later, when SHTF happens, you're going to have 154 people at your house. It's a whole lot like when you were in high school and you decided to throw a party at your mom's house and you invited 4 people and 170 folks showed up. It's like that, except they're all hungry. And most of them don't bring beer. So, anyway, there are a lot of reasons to get a bug out location. For those of you new to prepping, I do some research on it. See what your needs are, what you project you're going to want in one. But I'm going to give you some ideas of what to look out for in a bug out location. First things first, always first, water. At the top of any survival pyramid, you've got to have a place with water. It probably seems nonsensical if you're thinking, well, I'm just going to, buy a camping spot somewhere, or maybe a small house to act as a weekend or vacation house. Obviously, it's going to have water. Well, I see a lot of these guys, they're going to run off to the mountains and live out of a backpack and all kinds of other crazy stuff. They're not really researching where the streams are and how to purify the water all the time, or they think they can drink out of one of those special straws they bought at Walmart. Make sure you've got good, reliable water. It is what it is. That is the first thing. You probably want some seclusion. That does not mean living on the side of a mountain in Colorado with the elk and a wolf named Sparky. It sometimes just means a privacy fence. But you want to be able to do some things in secret. Be it have a garden or chickens or something like that. Don't think that when the grocery stores start getting a little cramped and people run out of money that they're not going to be eyeing your yellow squash. It'll happen. It has happened. There's a precedent for everything I'm talking about. Look at Venezuela or Argentina a few years before, parts of Russia after the Soviet Union fell. Africa has had any number of famines and other social unrest. You can study kind of what happened in some of these places. There's some excellent books about the economic collapse in Argentina, and there's some books on bug out locations you can look into. I'm not being paid to advertise any of them, but there are some really good references out there. So you want some seclusion. Just, like I say, even a privacy fence. As Hannibal Lecter said, people covet what they see. If they can't see it, they're less likely to want it. You want something that's easy to secure, preferably. Now, it's securing it for what you think is a reasonable threat. Chances are, if you have a shed with a couple days worth of food and some bottled water in it, a bunch of former Navy SEALs are not going to flashbang your front door and come in and get it. So what is your biggest threat? It also may mean securing it from wildlife. My grandfather lived in New Jersey and he had a garden, and he finally ended up planting 3 gardens so that he had one for the deer, one for the birds, and he got a garden too. Now, he had hell with wildlife coming in and eating all of strawberries, drove him mad. But the point is, he still had to grow his garden and have his crops with it. And I mean, he used it to supplement food, wasn't like he was starving. But point is, if you're relying on food, if you're by yourself or just you and say a spouse, you're not going to be able to guard the thing 24/7. So you want to be able to, you can secure it not just from people, but also wildlife. So think about that too. Hence why I say some seclusion, even a privacy fence. If you're off in the middle of the woods, nobody's going to find you, but, well, trust me, the deer will. You want something in or near a small town. Now, a lot of preppers will tell you not to be in a city, a town of any sort. And I get their argument, the idea that if everybody's going to go hungry, it's going to be craziness everywhere. But again, let's look at historical precedents. When the Soviet Revolution happened, you probably didn't want to be in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but things weren't all that bad in other parts of the country. The small towns were largely homogeneous villages made up of small groups of families who all knew each other and lived off the land anyway. They didn't have any particular reason to shoot each other in great number. There's a little bit of it, but not like it was in the big city. When Ferguson were having their riots, the other side of Missouri weren't. So if you're in a small town, you're less likely to see some of that. Neighbors know neighbors a little better. They're nicer to each other. They tend to share. But if you're near a small town as well, and the reason I say this is because no matter how well prepared you are, and trust me, there's some big channels that will convince you they are prepared with everything they need, at the end of the day, they're going to be short something. When's the last time you packed everything to go on vacation and didn't stop by a store to pick something up because you forgot toothpaste or something like that? The same is going to be true in a shit hits the fan scenario, simply because people are panicking. I mean, you're going to have a great bug out bag and you're going to take everything else and forget that. And it happens. So you want to have the ability to go to at least a small grocery store or convenience store and pick up a few things. Besides that, if it's something like another pandemic and we have to ride it out in a small town or in the woods, you are definitely going to want beer. So make sure there's a convenience store nearby where you can go get a six-pack, because if it's going to be the end of the world, friends, there is no reason to do it sober. So you want to have room for a garden. It's very important. Not just for the obvious aspect of food. Even if you are well prepared and have all the dry goods you need for 6 years, you probably still want room for a garden because, one, fresh vegetables are better than canned ones, but also because it gives you something to trade. Gives you something, I mean, be surprised when people are tired of eating canned green beans, they'll buy some fresh cucumbers off of you in exchange for something you want. Gardening's also therapeutic, and one of the things we so rarely as preppers talk about is people's mental well-being when there is an SHTF situation. We still need recreation. We still need to relax. I mean, trust me, this pandemic would not be going as well as it is without Amazon TV and Netflix. You shut that stuff off and shut off Facebook, and all of a sudden you're going to see some craziness in the streets. If a grid down situation happens, like a wide-scale power outage, an EMP or something, you're going to want something to do because, well, an idle mind is the devil's playground, as my grandmother used to say. You're also going to want a good area to clean game. And I'm going to tie this in with the potential for hunting or fishing. Now, some things you can have in your kitchen, but I doubt you really want to drag a deer or feral hog into your kitchen and clean it there. So, but you're going to want an area where you can clean it, not necessarily be seen by everybody, because if people are hungry and they see you cleaning a deer, well, they're going to want the backstrap or part of it anyway. But you also want an area you can keep bugs off of it while you're doing it. If you clean game regularly because you're a hunter, cool. You can do it fairly quickly. If it's your first time skinning out a deer, plan on being there for a minute while you're figuring it out. Same with fish or anything else. So you want an area that you can do some cleaning of game, the potential for hunting and fishing, which is why I recommend rural properties near but not in a small town. You may not necessarily have to harvest your own food. I know a lot of preppers, they've got MREs for a decade. Again, fresh is always better, and no matter how well prepared you are, Murphy's Law still counts. If it can go wrong, it's probably going to. You want some room for storage. Now, one of the things that I mentioned here is you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to prepping. You don't want to have that one location, that one safe, because no matter how well fortified it is, somebody finds out about it and wants in, they're going to do it. So why not diversify? Have some of your preps here, some of your preps there. But also from a practical standpoint, that when you talk about something like natural disasters, when the microburst hit my house, it actually did some damage and ruined some of our tools because it ripped parts of the roof off and everything else. And I point that out with hurricanes. I mean, we've seen hurricanes, tornadoes go through, and they literally obliterate certain neighborhoods, things like that. Why not have some backup stuff, clothes, food, tools that you might need to use? I mean, it would really suck if, I don't know, we're in the middle of a blackout and there was a large fire and your neighborhood went up. Remember, after I believe it was Hurricane Sandy that hit the East Coast in New York, burned like 35 houses on a Far Rockaway in Queens. Now, and don't swear me that, but it was somewhere in Queens. Anyway, the point is, the people in those houses were probably really prepared because many of them stayed there, but when they left those houses because of that fire, they had the clothes on their back. Probably a vehicle, but why not have somewhere where you've got some backup supplies in the event of a natural disaster or something like that? Believe it or not, that could probably come in pretty handy. You can use it if you're in a hurricane area and you've got a backup location that's safe from it, more or less. You can go there, pick up your generator, your power tools, your whatever else you're going to need to work on your house. And I'm telling you this not because I did it and it worked like a charm. It's because I didn't do it and it didn't work like a charm. So sometimes we have to learn from mistakes or oversights, so learn from mine. You want the potential for electricity. Now, if you're going to have to bug out long term, think a pandemic like this, you want to have, even if it's not a house with electricity, even if you're going to go stay at your hunting camp and live in a tent for a few weeks or a camper or something like that, you're still going to want to be able to pick up some internet. Even if you're going to live off the land, you still want to know when the world's coming back or if it's coming back. You want to keep updated on things that are going on. So for internet alone, you're probably going to want some electricity. Even if it's something like you buy a cabin in the woods and you park an RV on a piece of property out in the middle of nowhere, you want to at least have a generator because, well, in the summertime, having air conditioner is better than not having air conditioner. So, file that away. You want room for extra people. All the preppers I talk to are lone wolf guys. They're going to go live in the woods by themselves and shoot anybody that gets within 50 yards. You know what? No, they're not. What they're going to do is realize that they actually like that one cousin or their sister or niece or nephew more than they thought they did. Or they may find that while they have a lot of preps, they don't necessarily have all the skills they need, and they want to bring somebody in to help them out that has those skills. I mean, let's think about it. Just because we're preppers doesn't mean we have to set aside our humanity or our charity. Why not help a neighbor if they can help us back? And the easiest way to do that is by having a little extra room. It doesn't hurt anything, especially if we're not running out of food. With my preps, I don't prep for my immediate family. I prep for my immediate family times 3 because I know there's a good possibility we may pick up somebody along the way. It happens. So consider that as well. You want somewhere where you can do a little shooting. I don't know a prepper out there, no matter how liberal they are, that aren't considering some type of self-defense like guns or some type of hunting as a means. And even if you're one of those people that's going to use archery to do it, you still want the ability to shoot a bow and arrow. Whether it is on your property or whether it's a property nearby or the farmer over here doesn't care if you shoot behind his tank something. There's no sense having a gun if you are not going to practice with it, if you're not going to drill with it a little bit. Same with a bow and arrow. We're not all born Katniss Everdeen. Sometimes we have to practice with the bow and arrow before we get good. You want a place you can safely do that, both from a legal standpoint, but also you don't want to be trying to sight in your 30-06 on a quarter-acre backyard and have ricochets, things like that. You want to be able to actually do it right. So do consider having some room for shooting. I've got on my list potential for internet, which I talked about under electricity. But consider if you're going to be out somewhere really remote, something like a cell booster, and test this out ahead of time. Because getting a little data, even if it's just to check Fox News or something like that, can go a long way to keeping you updated. Knowledge is power. You want something that's within a half of tank of gas of your house. Some of y'all are old enough to remember September 11th. Now, September 11th had absolutely nothing to do with the country's fuel supply. Yet, I was living in Kingsville, Texas at the time, and like a lot of places, gas stations decided, well, we're probably going to war with the Middle East, and all of a sudden tried jacking up the price of fuel. Police departments had to come in, and we were near a Navy base, so the police departments were actually shutting it down to make sure the Navy base had fuel. And Matt was driving around in his 97 Nissan pickup with 1/8 of a tank of gas. So there's a good possibility that when a bad situation happens, you may not be able to get fuel, either because of something like that or just because of power outages. We fail to consider that most pumps now are electric, so it's not like there's some dude over there like cranking a handle to pump the gas out. So if the power goes out, you're going to have a hard time getting fuel. And I always consider my vehicles at empty at half a tank. Most preppers do. So that way, if something bad happens, you have to hop in your car and go. That half a tank of gas, and most vehicles can get you quite a ways. It's not across town. It could be a couple 100 miles. But test it out and make sure that you're within a half a tank of gas from your bug out location. I mean, don't get me wrong. If y'all want to go out farther, fine. But at the same time, be within a half a tank is my suggestion. Or some reasonable amount for you. That way, you know you can always get where you're going, to a safe spot. You also want something that's off of a major highway. Now, it's easy to drive down I-10 or I-35 or one of those and be like, oh, I like this little town. They have good German food. Or I like that little town because it has a cute courthouse. But major highways have the most traffic. So if something bad really happens, those are the routes people are going to take out. If you look at evacuations from any major city during a hurricane, you're going to see news footage of all kinds of people stuck on a highway. I remember one time during Hurricane, I believe it was Hurricane Ike, outside of Houston, it took people 10 hours to go 25 miles on the highway. It was blocked in. You couldn't go anywhere. Now, you want something that, you want to be in or near one of these towns that's not on a major highway. You want to drive 10, 15 miles away from anything that says interstate on it to get there. If it's 4 lanes, don't buy a town. Don't buy a house in that town. Don't get a place near that town. Go further out, because that's where the majority of people are going to be. And if a lot of people are having to bug out of a bad situation, an earthquake, a hurricane, something like that, you're going to have a lot of, as I've seen from experience, a lot of very desperate people heading into those small towns. Now, the question is, right, you want a bug out location, how do you pay for it? It's not like all of us are Rockefellers here. We all have bills. So I'm going to give you a couple options. Now, under reasons for bug out locations, I talk about pandemics, natural disasters, social unrest. But a fourth category here is recreation. Now, a lot of times we vacation. We spend the money going camping somewhere, or we go on a, fishing vacation and pay to go fish this lake, or we have a hunting lease somewhere we go to. You can tie in recreation to how you afford it. Because why not have a weekend house and you vacation there? If you have a family and kids, why not have a place you take them for fun on a regular basis, to camp, to fish, to hunt, whatever, I don't care. Whatever you want to do. But at the same time, it gives you an excuse to keep up with your bug out location. It gives you a chance to take the family out there so they can practice some of the skills they're going to need, making a campfire, actually fishing. If you want to have a greenhouse out there, you get to check on it every couple of weeks and see how the tomatoes are doing and harvest a little bit, whatever. But remember, on the cost here, we spend a lot of money recreationally in the United States, and most of the Western world consider recreation as a part of the expense. Now, there are a couple options here. One, if you're from a major city and you look at rural areas, by comparison, land is going to be cheap. I live in Spur, Texas, which is in Dickens County. Most land around here goes for about $1,000 an acre, and that's true for most of West Texas. Most of those properties have water on them. Most of them are either cultivated or ranch land with cattle. They'd be fine places to put a bug out location. I don't care at what level. If you're wealthy enough, you can put a fortified bunker out there, cool. If you're more middle class like me, you can park a camper out there. But for what you would pay for a $200,000 house, let's say in Dallas, which is not by any means top of the line, you could have a 150-acre farm in Dickens County with a house on it that's cultivated. More than that, some of this land can actually make you money. It's not going to make you a lot. It's not generally going to pay for itself. But if you want to offset some of the costs, bear in mind you can lease the property out for hunting if you don't, or for grazing cattle, or for CRP, or for somebody planting crops on. I mean, having a bug out location in the middle of a cornfield is probably boring most of the time, but during a famine of some sort, it's probably pretty handy. Anyway, bear in mind, some of this land can be an investment. Land is the one thing we can't make more of. It is bottled up. It's not like stocks where we can just magic them with a keystroke into existence. Land is a fixed amount. So it tends to always go up. Maybe not the time you want it to, but over time it does become more valuable. So if you're looking for some type of investment and think retirement here, property's not a bad way to go. And that can be a way to not only justify the expense, but a way you can route one bill to another. If you can't really afford to buy land by yourself, you may want to consider doing something like getting a hunting lease or a fishing lease somewhere. A place that you could go to that is under your care, custody, and control. You have a pre-existing relationship with the landowner if things get really bad, but a place that you can at least lease on the side. You can also look at some things like tax foreclosures. Now, if y'all have watched my videos, you've heard me refer to Spur, Texas as the tiny home capital of the world. That's because Spur a few years ago got themselves into a pickle where people were moving off and couldn't sell property, so they just let the county and the city have it. So they're selling housing lots in town for a few $100s. You could buy one. When the coronavirus thing is over, they're going to have an auction called Dickens County Tax Assessor. They'll tell you how. And you could buy a piece of property for $200, $300, $400, $500, less than $1,000, most of them. that already have water and electric on them that you could put whatever you want on it. There's not a lot of building restrictions, especially outside of the incorporated city limits of Spur, but there are properties available. You can build a cabin out there or live in a fifth wheel or just have it as a backup location. We've got a lake nearby, so you can make it your weekend fishing home. Or if you just want an extreme backup location, you can buy a piece of property. It's going to cost you $30 a year in taxes for $500. And if you do nothing else for it, you can then go out there and put a metal building on it that you can lock and secure and keep some of your preps on. But look at a lot of these small towns and small counties. Tax foreclosures cannot be overlooked. You can also go in with a group of people. Now, there are a lot of prepper groups out there. Some of them already have one guy has land and has other preppers with them. Sometimes you got 8 or 10 guys that want to invest in a piece of property that they would bug out to and keep their preps on, and maybe it's 50 acres and this guy gets this 5 and that guy gets that 5. Because individually they can't necessarily buy the property, but together they can. By the way, if y'all hear kind of grunting, I've got a pit bull in here and he snores even when he's awake. But consider going in with a group of people. Now, if you do get a hold of a piece of land somewhere and you're thinking, all right, how do I live on it? Because after all, 1,000 an acre doesn't sound bad, but let's say you buy 10 acres here in Dickens County or Crosby or Motley or Cottle County. By the way, all those counties need some economic revenue. They'd love to have you even come visit once a month on the weekend. How do I keep it cheap? Well, you can build a cabin. You can usually get a used camper RV or an RV for very little money, especially if you go to auctions. If you set aside a couple $1,000s and bargain shop it, you can find something to park on it. They're not always pretty, but they usually work, and it's basically a set-up little cabin. I've seen a lot of guys that are converting things like school buses or shipping containers where for a few $1,000s over the course of the year, they literally build a fully functioning house that's made out of solid steel for very little money. One of my personal favorites is set up a tent encampment. I mean, you've seen some of those Civil War movies, the old canvas tents. Why not? I mean, you can set it up to where normally it just looks like a meadow in the middle of some mesquite trees or piney woods or whatever. But then when you move in, all of a sudden you've got your little tent encampment going until you can afford something better. You can also get building materials that you repurpose a lot of times. It amazes me what people throw in the trash that's good lumber, good piping, good metals. You would be surprised if you ask around how much stuff people have that they could give you to also help with this. Now, again, I go back to the tiny house thing. Building a tiny house, just watch the HGTV show about it, can get very expensive somehow. But at the same time, you can also build them very inexpensively. On YouTube alone, there's video after video of somebody that built one for $1,500 or $2,000. And while they sound like tiny, like you wouldn't want to live in them, they're just a big wood tent. Most of them I've seen are 400 or 500 square feet. What they are is small houses. So basically my college apartment. But RVs are not necessarily large square footage. You wouldn't want to live in one full time, but they would be comfortable and have all the necessities for the purpose of a bug out and have very low cost. So consider reducing things like that. If you're wanting to research, look at the RV living blogs, the RV living channels. Look at some of the tiny home channels. If you've got a knack for construction or home renovation, think about repurposing some stuff. You'd really be amazed what you can do when you think about it. But see, a bug out location doesn't have to be a fancy house, a chateau in the woods, like Chateau de ma Mère. You don't need that. What you need is a safe place to go, a safe place to store some things, a place that isn't where you are when something bad happens. That's all a bug out location is. It's a way to get away. It can be for a weekend, it can be for 6 months because this coronavirus thing got really out of hand. Who knows? The point is, think about a bug out location, because if this coronavirus has taught us anything, not just in the U.S., look at China, Italy, other places like that where they've had food shortages or starting to get social unrest, is sometimes the smart thing to do is to not be where you are, especially if you're in a city. So if you're somebody new to prepping, and especially if you live in a large city, over 100,000 people, consider very seriously having a place to escape to. You can get creative. Again, I know a lot about my own little town of Spur, Texas. Do please look into it. Spurfreedom.org is an excellent resource to tell you what we have. But again, Spur is not unique, nor is my area with cheap land around it. So consider your options, consider what you think you need, consider what you want. Just because it's a bug out location doesn't mean it has to suck. We don't have to live under a pine tree and eat grubs and crap to get by. I mean, just because it's the end of the world doesn't mean you have to have burned pancakes. Come on. So, consider what you need, consider what you want. Your mental health is important, especially in a time of crisis. So file that away. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. And frankly, guys, if you have thoughts of your own, put it in the comments too. Like, subscribe, tell me what you think. Because people are going to need bug out locations, and we need to really have a good discussion over this that's also a practical discussion. Anyway, once again, folks, my name is Matt. You've been watching Broke Rednecks Prepping. See you next time.